Hey guys, this is Brian Lewis from the Raw Moment, and I'm just here to talk to you guys about the basketball induction ceremony being held Friday night, September 9th in Springfield. My own opinion is that everyone in that Hall of Fame class is very vital to the past and the present and also the future of basketball. We know Allen Iverson is getting in. We know Shaq is more than deserving to get into the Hall of Fame. But here's another name that probably has been the biggest debate in this class, probably in a very long couple of years, and that's Yao Ming. Now, if you remember anything about Yao Ming was the first overall pick in the 2002 NBA draft by the Houston Rockets. It was probably, I think he was definitely the first pick outside of the European or North American, in the Western Hemisphere. So he was the first Eastern Hemisphere draft pick, I think, picked that high. And I got to tell you, Yao Ming lived up to everything and more for the Houston Rockets. He was a very, very serviceable player. He was an elite player for a bit. I really do believe that he was one of those guys that transcended a generation on and off the court. I mean, you look into China, he's a god in China. Okay, and I think even his biggest critics would definitely say that. The amount of the game expansion in China, we're going to see it in a generation, or maybe even two, if China's basketball can, correlate to what Yao Ming was able to do. And let's face it, all the Chinese players after Yao just weren't as productive. I know Yi Jian Lian gets a lot of jokes. I mean, he was the sixth overall pick by the Bucks, and he didn't work out. I think he's still in the NBA. I'm not sure, but that's irrelevant. And for those people that disagree with Yao Ming's induction, I'm going to mention four that are in the Hall of Fame that may have a very similar resume to what Yao Ming had in the NBA. And I'm just going to throw these names out there and explain my reasoning, and then you guys can leave comments or whatever you guys want. Anything that is said on the media can be, or myself or anything like that, can be interpreted in many different ways. That's the way cultivation works. And I'm just gonna go ahead. First case, and I think he's the greatest college basketball player of all time. And I do think, he does have an MVP to his name also, and that man is Bill Walton. He won the NBA League MVP in 1977 with the Portland Trailblazers. Picked him number one at 76. He played for Dr. Jack Ramsey, played with Maurice Lucas in Portland. And I got to be honest, man, Bill Walton was one of the most colorful characters of his generation. And, obviously people remember him later in his career being a sixth man of the year with the Boston Celtics. But Bill Walton really was a guy that was, if he had the ability to stay healthy, he would have had a long 12 to 15 year career, which he still had a pretty long career considering the injuries, but it was very disappointing to watch all the injuries happen to him. But even that, he was still able to do so much in so little amount of time. And also, you can't reject the numbers that he put up at UCLA, where he won a couple national championships under John Wooden. He was the leader of those teams. He was the best player on those teams. And that was an era of college basketball. Remember, you had an undefeated Indiana team. You had a couple of great teams. Houston was pretty good. So you had an era of college basketball there where there were a lot of good teams. And also, don't forget the Duke team. I think they played Duke in '76. He might have still been in college basketball in that time. I'm not sure. He might have been drafted that year, actually. So there's that. There's another guy in the '70s. He was already in the NBA by the time Bill Walton was in college, and that man is Dave Cowens, former Boston Celtics center. If you ever listen to Tommy Heinsohn talk about anything with his Tommy points, for those people that watch League Pass or people that are Celtics fans like myself, you guys know this better than anybody. Dave Cowens was one of the biggest competitors in NBA history. He was one of those hustle guys. He was the Pete Rose of the NBA in that era in the '70s, because he just went all out for everything. I mean, you watch NBA TV. They have the hardwood classics of the '70s. You could literally watch Dave Cowens, diving all over the court for basketballs. He had the ability to score inside. He was a tough man for a guy who was 6'9", playing center in that era with Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes being a very dominant power forward in that era. You had a lot of good players, that were bigs, because bigs were still a very important part of basketball in that era. Another guy, we're going a little bit of small ball, even though he was like 6'6", is Pistol Pete Maravich. Now, granted, a lot of his off-court troubles I will leave out of this conversation, because I'm not trying to, defame his character in any way, shape, or form. Rest in peace, Pistol Pete Maravich. You were a legend in this game, probably the most underrated point guard of all time. In my opinion, I don't think Magic Johnson would have happened unless he was able to watch Pistol Pete Maravich in his time. And Magic Johnson may never attribute it to it, but I guarantee if you talk to him about it, his jolly old self would probably tell you Pistol Pete Maravich was a huge inspiration for how he looked at the game of basketball, especially since Magic Johnson's coach, Pat Riley, played against him for a long time. And I look at Pistol Pete Maravich as this. He had a couple of great years with the Jazz, and I understand, he kind of wore out his welcome for a couple of teams. But Pistol Pete Maravich really was one of the more talented guys of that era. And there's all that. And obviously you have, Earl Monroe is also in there, but Earl Monroe is just way too good. Another fine example would be Dragic Petrovic. Now, I understand he's in the Hall of Fame for totally different circumstances. His life really took a shambles when Yugoslavia disbanded, and then you had Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Slovenia, Montenegro, and I think Kosovo's in that part of the world too. And if I'm wrong, then be more than happy to correct me. I hate getting things wrong. So, you have Dragic Petrovic, who stood for so much, and then he died in a car accident. And that was really tragic. And he was really about to hit his prime, man. He really cared about Croatia. And I think anyone who has that heritage in them can justify that. And they can tell you for days the impact that Dragic Petrovic has had in Yugoslavia. In fact, there's a lot of argument. People said if Yugoslavia had stayed together and avoided political turmoil, that maybe in '96, that dream team might have had a run for their money. Now, I'm not going to, that's a debate for another day. I could probably have that argument with you. But I really have a lot of faith that, a lot of these guys off the court was more of an impact. And particularly for guys like Bill Walton, who is a very colorful personality. And I understand, he's a bit of a delusional guy. But he has fun. He has a lot of fun with his life. He's an entertaining color commentator, okay? Dragic Petrovic off the court stood for so much. He really stood by the Croatian side during that whole turmoil, during that whole war. I don't really know what to call it because that was so tragic. Just to read about it, just to watch that 30 for 30 was tragic. Bill Walton had all those injuries. And then you have, Arvydas Sabonis, who was under the USSR, wasn't able to come to America until very, very late in his career. Obviously now his son getting drafted, and now he's going to play for the Thunder. We'll see if DeMontes can really live up to the family name. But I just look at it, guys, like this. You don't have to like Yao Ming. There are players in the Hall of Fame in baseball and football that I necessarily think don't belong in there. I could go on for days about how Terry Bradshaw and Marvin Harrison don't belong in the NFL Hall of Fame. But I tend to I just remember this. Okay, thinking about this, in the last couple of days. All those guys that get in the Hall of Fame, they're considered the best of their sport for their era. They represent the past, present, and obviously what the future looks back to as far as the standard to compare players in the future. And I really do believe that Yao Ming does belong in the Hall of Fame because of what he's been able to do in China. The expansion of the game. And, the CBA that continues to be a league that, does pretty well over there. Now, granted, I know the level of basketball may not be even close to what the NBA is or even what Division I college basketball is. But you have to respect the fact that China is really, really trying to bring basketball into their lives. So they're taking something that we love and we developed and we made from scratch. And they want to develop that for themselves. They want to make their own game. And I totally respect that. And I think China should be respected in that aspect. And Yao Ming being in, the Hall of Fame, now you're going to have tourists from all over the world looking and go, yeah, Yao Ming, I remember him. Or, man, that guy really stood for so much. That was a good man. And I think that alone, people forget that being a good man in sports, not everybody is rainbows and butterflies. Not everybody's like, a priest, as you can say. They're not choir boys, as Bill Parcells once said. But I do think we have to honor those guys in the past and make sure that they get recognized in the future. This is Ryan Lewis, The Raw Moment. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can hit me up on here. I'll definitely reply. Remember when you're watching the Basketball Hall of Fame tonight that all those guys, including Iverson and Shaq, who I didn't mention, both, all of them really changed the way our lives look in sports, and they really changed our expectations of what great athletes were. And that'll be it, guys. Have a great evening.